On the 3rd of March, 1995, the FBI got a tip about Vladimir Levan, one of the most notorious robbers ever known in US history. This tip revealed that he was at Stansted Airport in London about to make a getaway. Together with the UK police, the FBI arrested the perp and subsequently discovered his base of operations, thereby putting an end to one of the biggest scams to ever surface in the 20th century. Levan was a mastermind that had perpetrated Citibank in the 1990s, a period when robberies only took place up front and behind bank counters. He fraudulently made away with over $10.7 million through the use of telecommunications in his heist and created a whole new form of cyber theft that was not known during his time.
Perhaps for the first time in history, we had an individual and his primary accomplice in that scheme to defraud was a computer.
Levan wreaked havoc over a period of 4 months, but went down the drain in a matter of seconds due to one costly mistake. In this video, we will take a trip down history's memory lane to see the life and crimes of Vladimir Levan, the one who broke into Citibank digitally. Not much is known about Levan's background. From his record, we know his full name is Vladimir Leonidovich Levan, and he was a Russian national. That's pretty much everything. His story only became widespread in the late 1990s when his attempted heist was uncovered. At this point, news spread among the media that Levan was a mathematician who had a degree in biochemistry from St. Petersburg State Institute of Technology. But subsequently, it was alleged by a fellow accomplice in the years following his arrest that Levan was not really a mathematician, biologist, or any kind of scientist like the public claimed, but was instead some kind of ordinary system administrator that worked for the team of hackers who penetrated Citibank, a major bank in the United States. Given that his early records were never put together, it is difficult for anyone to understand the series of events in his life that might have led him to his path of crime. What we can look at, however, is the nature of his life as a hacker and as a culprit who was later caught. That said, what exactly did Levan do to gain the infamous title he was known for during his time? Levan's criminal life came into existence as a result of many enabling factors. Since it happened towards the end of the 20th century, it meant that it took place in a time when technology was barely afoot but in existence regardless. Robbers prior to his time had to show up at the bank, demand for physical cash over the counter, and make a run for it before they were caught. Take Bonnie and Clyde, for example. They were the typical robbers at the time. Vladimir Levan, however, was not. Levan utilized the internet and telecommunications for his heist. It was such an unprecedented case in the history of data security. This leaves us with the big question: how did Levan manage to pull off a heist in a bank as reputable as Citibank? Prior to the evolution of ICT, banks employed a lot of manpower, but in the 1990s, the banking structure became more digitally inclined and were thereby connected across countries and continents through the internet. This very factor paved the way for Levan's hacking scheme. The way the internet worked in the 1990s was a little different from what we are accustomed to now. For one, there were different types of internet with their own distinct protocols and ecosystems. Some of them were Telenet, ARPANET, and TimeNet, among others. The idea of the internet was initially bred by the Advanced Research Projects Agency network, ARPANET, and when it looked like the world needed it, all of the other internet types inadvertently found themselves in a tight competition for dominance. Each of these internet types were designed to keep the other away or limit a bridge between them and foreign internet. For instance, people using Telenet could not access other people who were using a different kind of internet. It was basically an ecosystem of its own. Furthermore, within the system, only Telenet users were connected to one another due to a link known as X.25 protocol. During this period of time, Telenet was the popular internet. The early internet was costly and only available to governments to connect to, but Telenet was free and open for use by the general public. You only needed a modem and a phone line to run it, and who wouldn't have been able to afford them in the 1990s? This helped boost its popularity, and with time, it spread across the US. Large companies like Dun & Bradstreet, Apple, Westinghouse, Boeing, and Sprint hopped on Telenet as it enabled them to communicate with their branches. Then, over time, Sprint acquired it and renamed the company to SprintNet. Citibank made use of SprintNet. As earlier stated, computers using the same internet were connected to one another in their own ecosystem. This made them susceptible to hacking attempts. Going by this reasoning, Citibank's use of SprintNet already set the stage for Levan and his team to take action. However, it was not the only factor that led to the heist that would later take place in 1994. There was another major event that took place before that. SprintNet had some faults. It was not user-friendly and took a lot of patience to operate and enjoy. This made it less appealing and consequently led to it having only a few thousand users in the 90s. When compared to the billions of internet users today, SprintNet was mildly disappointing. However, things changed for this internet type, or at least for a particular set of its users, hackers. An online magazine called Frack appeared on the scene. It was like a news platform for hackers. By 1983, Frack magazine had released over 41 issues, and each of these issues provided new hacking techniques, insights, and information for hackers. The magazine would later go on to be the longest-running online hacker magazine of all time, as it still releases issues today. While Frack magazine continued to offer advice on cyberspace uninterrupted, it was issue 42 that left a huge impact on everyone involved in this case. In the issue, a lot of SprintNet numbers were listed out. Additionally, details on how to connect to each number, what the holder might be, and the sections of states and companies connected to SprintNet were disclosed. These sections also showcased numbers one could dial to get into huge companies such as Westinghouse, Apple, and even Citibank. At this point, Citibank had offices in Singapore, Tokyo, Milan, Paris, Manila, and its headquarters, New York, and all were connected through SprintNet. The systems on which they ran were VAX computers, Unix systems, mail servers, DEC servers, among others. This one Frack issue had revealed all these details, as well as the location of all 363 different Citibank computers online. As you probably guessed it, this meant trouble for the computer security of the bank at that time. So now that all this information was out in the open, what happened next? A group of Russian hackers acted on the information they had stumbled on in the hacking magazine and began to target Citibank. For over a year, they spent their precious time scouring Citibank's network in hopes of finding a loophole and getting access to the bank's information and its treasury. It wasn't easy, as most connections they poked at would either not give access or were simply protected with passwords. However, their efforts paid off when they finally found a loophole. That fateful day, one of the systems that was normally locked with a password was left open for some reason. Whatever the reason was, it favored this team of hackers heavily as they were able to penetrate the bank. These old computer systems allowed third parties to ride in on people's accounts if the user forgot to log out. So, through this unguarded login, the crew were able to gain access to Citibank passwords. Subsequently, they scanned all 363 Citibank computers to see which ones they could log into with the passwords they recovered. One of these hackers managed to dig deep and get into a computer that looked like it was used to transfer money. On this system, the user would log in, type in the bank name, account number, and the amount to transfer, and that was all. This hacker, named Buckazoid, was fascinated by his findings and made a call across to Levan to tell him about his new discovery. Levan got excited about this piece of information and paid $100 to get all the details out of Buckazoid. Citibank was handling trillions of dollars a day through all their systems. so a few rogue transfers here and there could likely go unnoticed. Buckazoid knew this, but still decided against putting his newfound knowledge to use. Levan, however, shared an entirely different sentiment. In the summer of 1994, Levan had all he needed to start his hacking campaign. He was a 30-year-old who had in-depth knowledge of computers. During the day, he worked for a software company, but behind closed doors, he took to the internet, as he knew that all he had to do was get into Citibank's node, type in a few commands, and hit enter. He was ready to steal as much as humanly possible. But the Russian hacker was smart. He knew what he was getting into, and so didn't want to draw attention to himself. In view of this, he decided against transferring money to himself in St. Petersburg. Instead, he got a friend to travel to Finland, entered the Citibank computer, and wired a staggering $400,000 to the account in Finland. This was the beginning of his journey as a criminal. He repeated the same thing as he continued stealing from Citibank. However, he knew he couldn't pull it off on his own. He was just one person with enough access to a vast amount of money. This left him unprotected and quite limited. So in order to fix this situation, he enlisted the help of Russia's Tambov gang, who were more or less hardened thugs. Levan struck a deal with the gang. He asked that they set up bank accounts around the world, collect money from bank transfers, and fly back. The Tambov gang did as requested and funded the people who would do these jobs for them. Everything was running smoothly and according to plan. So at what point did things go wrong? The minute the first transfer was successful, the bank was alerted and they reported the case to the FBI. Subsequently, they noticed that the same issue persisted. There was obviously a bad transfer happening somewhere, but they were unaware of how they kept recurring. The good thing, however, is that they managed the situation regardless. Whenever there was a bad transfer, the bank would be alerted and would foil the plan by blocking the account it was sent to or just contacting the FBI to make arrests where necessary. After the first heist, all other attempts made by Levan to steal money fraudulently across the country were intercepted by the bank and authorities. Then, at long last, there was a breakthrough in the case. One of the men who was sent to pick up money at a bank was caught. He cooperated with the authorities and placed a call to Levan. The one mistake that he made in this phone call, Levan's name was mentioned and he basically admitted to his crimes. Now the authorities had a name and location, but the latter proved to be a difficult discovery as they knew he was on Russian soil and would therefore be difficult to arrest. This was all the more true when Russian police refused to arrest him, let alone agree to extradite him. If an arrest was nowhere in sight, how then were the FBI able to catch Levan? In a rare plot twist, it turned out that Levan had gotten himself on the radar of the Russian police for his involvement with the Tambov gang. This meant that their support for him was not going to extend beyond border lines. When Levan left St. Petersburg and was to change planes in London in March 1995, the FBI was tipped and they acted swiftly. Levan was found waiting in the lounge and was subsequently arrested. He denied his involvement in the whole scheme and claimed he was innocent. It wasn't until his computer was retrieved from Russia that the FBI was 100% sure they had caught the right guy. The Russian cops had busted and arrested a bunch of people who belonged to the Tambov gang. It was through this raid that the FBI discovered Levan's computer, as well as the other incriminating evidence hidden in it. Levan spent 30 months in UK jails until he was extradited to the US for trial. During his trial, he pled guilty to all the charges against him. Vladimir Levan attempted 40 fraudulent money transfers, which amounted to $10 million in total. He succeeded in stealing $400,000 from his first heist, and this was partly because the FBI wasn't involved at the time. Unfortunately, neither Citibank or the FBI could recover that $400,000. Levan must have used it in expanding his business with the Tambov gang. Levan was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a fee of $240,000 in restitution. However, his jail term was significantly reduced because the 30 months he had spent in UK jails were considered and removed from his sentence. Nothing has been heard from him ever since. It's as if he completely vanished from the earth. But be that as it may, his name and stance as the pioneer of online bank robbery still remains in history.